Revenge with Karen.
I knew something was off when I saw the company-branded binder with Vincent's face laminated on the damn cover, smiling like he'd just solved compliance with a wink and a PowerPoint. Transition lead, Vincent R. Ellison, it said in bold, like he'd personally invented due diligence and client data mapping. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds, half expecting it to burst into flames from sheer fraudulence. This was the same guy who once asked if SOC-2 was a Star Wars robot. Meanwhile, I was the one who had spent the last 9 years turning Trivexa's paper maze into a system that could actually pass external audit. I'd built our transition roadmap from scratch, line by agonizing line, policy by bulletproof policy. And now, I was watching it all get handed off to a man whose greatest skill was speaking confidently while saying absolutely nothing. Kind of guy who called me Mel in meetings like we were work husband/work wife, only to circle back and gut my roadmap because it lacked sparkle. But I didn't flip the table. I didn't even flinch. I sat in that glass-walled conference room like a statue in slacks, silently cataloging every overwritten file and spreadsheet being reshaped into Vincent's ego-stuffed version of progress. Because that's what you do when you've been quietly indispensable for almost a decade. You let the rookies trip on their own shoelaces. By the way, if you're one of the 93% listening right now who forgot to tap that subscribe button or throw us a like, maybe do it. Helps the team, makes the caffeine budget less theoretical, and well, Vincent can't stand it when people admire my work more than his. So yeah, appreciate it. Back to the flaming clown parade. We were weeks out from final sign-off with Kepleris Corp., a $160 million buyout that would essentially absorb Trivexa into their client onboarding operations. I had written every single transition process document we'd be handing over. The 144-page playbook. Mine. The FAQ tree that mapped client timelines to compliance checklists. Mine. Stupid laminated color-coded tracker with emoji legends. Unfortunately, also mine. And it worked. It all worked. Which is why it felt like watching someone disassemble a bomb with salad tongs when Vincent started replacing entire pages with his optimized visuals. He deleted my live access to the policy matrix, shifted control of the client checklist to his team, announced in a team stand-up that Melissa will remain in a supporting role. Supporting, like a paperclip. The worst part? No one said a word. The younger analysts scared of rocking the boat. The execs too enamored with Vincent's leadership presence to notice he thought GDPR was a type of printing ink. And the CEO, he liked Vincent's vibe, fresh energy, he called it. Like we were trying to hire a backup dancer instead of finalize the largest acquisition in company history. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I stayed late. I double-checked every insurance rider, every transition clause, every personnel designation buried in the annexes. I cross-referenced backup contacts. I printed hard copies of every document they'd quietly unshared with me, not because I was planning revenge. Not yet, just because I knew what they didn't. That some bridges don't burn, they ignite. On the night before the Kepleris kickoff meeting, Vincent swaggered out of the elevator with a leather folio and a grin that could give a Botox clinic a run for its money. He said to no one in particular, "Tomorrow's the day, folks. Let's make it sparkle." I was already at my desk, cross-checking one final detail. 3 lines of text, buried deep in the compliance packet. That night, I slept like a woman who knew something everyone else had forgotten. The person who writes the handoff doesn't always hand it off. Sometimes, just wait until someone needs it. Badly. He called it a quick sync, but the second I saw Vincent standing in the break room with that smug tilt to his jaw and 2 cups of corporate-branded coffee, one obviously intended as some symbolic olive branch, I knew this was a culling, not a conversation. The door hadn't even closed behind me before he started talking, like I'd already agreed to whatever garbage script he was rehearsing. "Melissa," he said, leaning against the minifridge like he owned the air inside it, "first of all, I want you to know how much we all value the foundation you've built." Translation: we're about to bulldoze it. He slid one of the coffees toward me like I was supposed to thank him for the honor of being screwed over while caffeinated. That said, the board's been thinking a lot about optics. You know how important presentation is to the Kepleris team. They're big on innovation, agility, energy. Said energy like it had a trademark symbol. I didn't pick up the cup. I didn't blink. So we're going to streamline the transition front, he continued, flipping open his overpriced notebook. Give them something sleeker, more current, less legacy, like I was a floppy disk in a cloud storage world. You'll still be involved, of course, he added, a faux reassuring smile stretching across his over-whitened teeth, supporting from the back end. Reviewing. Spot checking. But the face of the transition. That'll be me and Dana from Ops. She just gets their vibe. Dana, the girl who once formatted an Excel sheet in Comic Sans. I know change can feel abrupt, he said, and I swear he tried to touch my arm like this was a Hallmark farewell scene. But let's be honest, Mel, you're brilliant, but sometimes you get stuck in the weeds, a little risk-averse, a little slow. I didn't move, I didn't crack. Just looked him dead in the eye and said, understood. Because what do you say when a man tells you he's lighting your life's work on fire to make better shadows with his face? You say nothing, you watch. That moment, the way he mistook my silence for submission, was the first real mistake he made. Vincent believed in performance over precision, flash over fact. He thought being loud in meetings made him smart. That copying a few slides from McKinsey gave him depth. Worst of all, he thought I needed this job more than he needed me. I left that break room without touching the coffee, without saying another word. But something inside me had shifted, quietly, like a tectonic plate. You don't scream when someone robs you with a smile. You just count the tools you still have left. And I had one, buried, precise, and already ticking. The hallway back to my desk felt longer than usual. Gauntlet of fake ferns and fake people who pretended not to hear the whisper of your demotion before you did. I sat down, opened the last clean version of the transition playbook, the one with my metadata stamped all over it, and saved a personal copy to an encrypted drive. Legacy, huh? They were about to find out how slow I really was. Not in action, in letting them implode. There's a moment, right before you pull a trigger, that your body goes perfectly still. Not tense, not scared, just waiting. That's what it felt like the night I reopened the Kepleris acquisition packet for what had to be the 100th time. It was nearly midnight. Office was dark except for the soft hum of the server closet and the glow of my dual monitors. Everyone else had gone home to Netflix and melatonin. I stayed because I needed to see it again, needed to feel it in my hands. The PDF sat like a bomb on my desktop, 76 pages of glossy promises and legal chess moves. I knew it backward. I'd written half of it, edited the rest. But what I was looking for now wasn't in the headlines or boldface. It was in the footnotes, the legal rider, the clause no one read because they assumed someone else had already handled it. Section 14.3b, Transition Coverage and Insured Personnel. 3 names should have been there if Vincent had done his damn job. Or Dana. She'd paused between color-coding her Slack emojis. But no, just one name. Mine, Melissa Ann Granger. Transition Operations Lead. Bonded, credentialed. Primary key personnel post-acquisition. The only one listed on the insurance policy required by Kepleris to validate the transition process. I stared at it, pulse slow and deliberate. Not smiling, not smug. Just absorbing it like the smell of rain before a storm. They never updated it, because of course they didn't. Vincent didn't know what this document was, let alone where to find it. The CEO didn't care, as long as the numbers looked tidy on the pitch deck. And the board, they were too busy prepping for their golden parachutes to question which poor soul actually had to wear the boots during post-acquisition cleanup. And me? I'd added my name to that rider 3 months ago. I remember it clear as gin. Been in a Thursday night Zoom with our external insurer, sweating through a muggy spring and watching Vincent host a leadership vision panel from his balcony in Cabo. The policy update had been on my desk for weeks. Kepleris required all key transition staff to be bonded under a $10 million liability clause. A safeguard, they called it, in case of mismanagement or material disruption. No one was going to volunteer for that liability, certainly not Vincent, but I knew better. You can't be erased if your name is the legal spine holding the acquisition together. So I emailed the rep, paid the credentialing fee myself, signed the affidavit, sent in a notarized background check and compliance certification. Just in case, I said to myself, because I've lived long enough in offices like this to know, CYA isn't just a phrase, it's a religion. And that little act of foresight, a quiet $312 out of my own bank account, had turned into a live grenade. One I now held by the pin. Vincent didn't know. The CEO didn't know. Legal had skimmed and assumed the updates were someone else's responsibility. That was the culture. Bounce accountability like a hot potato until someone else gets burned. I saved the packet again, this time under a new name. Bridge Control Auth Final PDF backed it up twice, one to a private drive, one to an encrypted stick I kept in the lining of my purse. Then I shut my laptop, turned off the lights, and sat there for a moment in the dark office, letting the silence settle around me like armor. I wasn't out. I was invisible. And in a place like Trivexa, being invisible meant you could walk right past the guard dogs and reset the fuse box. The buyout meeting smelled like fresh printed lies and stale ambition. Those boardroom mornings where the pastries are too pretty to eat and the smiles are pulled tighter than a botoxed brow. Everyone showed up in their finest illusion, CEO in his I'm not worried tie, Vincent in his 3 sizes too slim suit, Dana with her hair curled like it was prom for middle management. And me, second row, no nameplate, no folder, no role. Just the woman who built the engine now being paraded without the keys. Vincent opened with a joke. Of course he did. Hope you folks brought sunglasses, he said, stepping up to the head of the table. Because what we've built here, it shines. Kepleris didn't laugh. The lead buyer, a salt and pepper man in a charcoal suit who looked like he used contracts as coasters, just blinked once and opened his legal pad. But Vincent didn't notice. He was too busy dazzling himself. Slides began, color gradients, transition milestones, corporate buzzwords stacked like IKEA furniture with no screws. Vincent talked in spirals, synergies, customer-centric pivots, agile frameworks. At one point, he even used the phrase optimized trust funnels like it meant something. Meanwhile, I sat behind him like a ghost in a cardigan, watching the buyer's pen tap 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 against the table. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The transition binder. Dana handed it out like it was a sacred text, black leather embossed, thick enough to kill a mouse. Kepleris's legal team flipped through it quickly, habitually. But the lead buyer, he read it. His fingers paused on page 17. Who prepared this? He asked. Vincent leaned forward, beaming. That would be my transition team. Dana here managed the framework. I oversaw the overall strategy. We've refined a lot of what was previously a bit dense. He actually chuckled, but the buyer didn't smile. Instead, he turned the page slowly and looked across the table right at me. You're not on this list, he said. It wasn't a question, it was an observation, and it dropped like a hammer. For a second, the room froze. I didn't speak, didn't move, just met his gaze and gave a polite nod. Not defiant, not meek, just present. Vincent jumped in. Melissa was involved early on, yes, but we've since restructured the handoff. Board agreed a streamlined approach made more sense for Kepleris expectations. The buyer didn't respond. He just closed the binder, not dramatically, not with anger, just finality, like a drawer shutting on someone's hopes. He looked at Dana, then at the CEO, then back to Vincent. This binder, he said, tone flat, doesn't align with the personnel disclosures you submitted last quarter. The insurance file listed a different primary. The CEO stiffened. Vincent waved it off, that arrogant little half-laugh leaking out. Oh, we've since updated roles internally. It's all the same knowledge, just redistributed among a younger, more agile team. Melissa was risk-averse. We needed faster execution. I could see the buyer's jaw flex once, a small tick, like he'd tasted something sour and decided not to spit it out yet. That's not how insurance works, he said. Vincent blinked. Dana opened her mouth, then closed it. Buyer slid the binder across the table like it was radioactive and leaned back in his chair. I'll need to verify this discrepancy with legal, he said calmly. Until then, there's no further point continuing today's agenda. The air drained from the room. I sat still, heart beating slow and deep, not smiling, not smirking. But if you'd looked close, you might have seen it, the faintest twitch at the corner of my mouth. Vincent turned around, confused, finally realizing I wasn't just decoration. I looked right through him. He had shuffled the binder, but he forgot whose hands had built it. The click of the binder closing felt louder than the hum of the recessed ceiling lights or the soft clink of water glasses on leather coasters. It cut through the room with surgical clarity, no drama, no fuss. Just one motion from the Kepleris buyer, deliberate and final. He didn't slam it. That would have implied emotion. This was colder, more efficient, like he was disposing of expired meat. This is non-compliant, he said, voice as calm as a scalpel. The air in the boardroom shifted, stiffened. Dana's hand twitched toward her pen like she could somehow scribble the tension away. The CEO glanced at legal, but they were already flipping through their own copies of the disclosure packet, the rustle of paper, suddenly louder than Vincent's now silent slideshow. I sat still in the second row, watching it all unfold like a movie I'd seen too many times, except this time I had the ending. The buyer tapped the binder with one finger. "This doesn't match the insured transition personnel listed in your disclosure packet," he said, not accusatory, just tired, like a man fed up with being lied to before lunch. Vincent straightened in his seat, blinking too often. "It's updated," he said too quickly. Melissa was reassigned. We, streamlined based on board consensus. Dana and I split the responsibilities. She's been integral. Dana nodded, lips pressed tight like someone who didn't study for the test but hoped extra credit would save her. "Then your policy is void," the buyer replied. 5 words, no hesitation, like he was reading a weather report. Void. It landed like a brick on Vincent's shiny new desk. The CEO went pale. You could actually see it, a shade drop behind his eyes, his lips parting just slightly like he'd forgotten how breathing worked. "No, hold on," Vincent said, his voice rising, fraying at the edges. "That can't be right. We reviewed the policy last quarter. Melissa she was too in the weeds. We needed fresh leadership for optics." Optics, that word again. The buyer turned to legal. "Can you confirm the named insured personnel?" One of the Kepleris lawyers, blonde, tired, and absolutely done with us, pulled out a copy of the transition policy and flipped directly to page 6. "Melissa Ann Granger," she read aloud. "Sole named and bonded transition authority. No alternates or delegates listed." Silence. Vincent looked at the CEO like a child who just realized his magic trick involved swallowing a razor blade. "Wait, what does that mean exactly?" Dana asked, her voice tight. The buyer looked right at her, then at Vincent, then let his gaze rest on me. "Means none of you are authorized to touch a single client process post-acquisition. It means our liability coverage is compromised. It means we don't proceed until she's reinstated." Fully, I didn't blink, didn't smile. Just adjusted the sleeve of my blazer and crossed my legs, slowly. The CEO finally spoke, voice brittle. "There must be some way to reassign, not mid-deal," the buyer cut in. "Not after disclosures, not without exposing both parties to massive liability. If your transition lead is unavailable, the deal halts." He turned the binder slightly so the company logo faced Vincent again like a courtroom exhibit. "This isn't an optics issue. It's a compliance breach. We expected structure. Instead, we're getting vibes." That one stung. Vincent opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "We can fix this. Melissa can support in a back-end role. She knows the material." "She is," the buyer said without turning the material. No one spoke. I watched the CEO's hand tremble as he reached for his water. Watched Dana go gray beneath her bronzer. Watched Vincent glance back at me with something new behind his eyes. Panic. The kind that doesn't show up in float charts. The kind that smells like a future going up in smoke. And I sat there, quiet, invisible, irreplaceable, waiting for them to realize what I already knew. Sometimes, most powerful person in the room isn't the one talking. It's the one whose name you forgot to delete. The silence was the kind that made you forget to swallow. You could hear the low thrum of the projector cooling down and the distant whir of the HVAC, both sounding like funeral music for Vincent's credibility. The CEO's hands, usually so steady when pointing at spreadsheets and stock trends, trembled just slightly as he flipped through the transition documents like maybe, just maybe, a miracle would materialize between the lines. But there was no miracle, only negligence. Legal was already in motion. 2 of them, gray-suited, dead-eyed, leaned together, whispering across the table like stage actors caught rewriting the script mid-performance. One passed a laptop to the other. Another reached for the original disclosure packet. And I didn't move, make a sound. Just slipped my phone from my pocket, unlocked it with my thumb, and opened the folder I'd labeled Insurance Trigger Evidence 3 months ago. It had one file, an email from Langley Assurance Group. Subject line, confirmation of bonded personnel, Trivexa to Kepleris transition in it. My full name, certification ID, policy number, and the rider clause stating I was the sole bonded authority authorized to manage the post-acquisition roadmap. No alternate, no delegate, no override clause. I turned the phone face down on my lap like a card not yet played but already deadly. The CEO exhaled a thin line of breath through his nose, like a man watching his own obituary take shape. Then he looked at Vincent, and for the first time, really looked at him. not as the fast-talking VP with shiny graphs and an MBA for the gram attitude, but as a man who had walked this entire deal into a legal bear trap. And then he blinked. Melissa, the CEO said, voice taut and cracked like overbent glass, is the only bonded transition lead under our current policy. He didn't look at me when he said it. Didn't have to. All eyes went to Vincent. And Vincent? Oh, Vincent sputtered. That can't be right, he stammered, ready rifling through his leather folio like he'd find a trapdoor under a business card. We submitted updated org charts. Dana's listed as co-lead on the July version. Melissa wasn't even in the meeting when we finalized the roles. I personally signed the updated task flow. The buyer didn't flinch. Legal didn't look up. Insurance doesn't care about your org chart, I finally said, voice low but steady. First words I'd spoken all meeting. Vincent turned like he'd forgotten I could speak. I held up the phone just high enough so only the CEO and legal could see the subject line of the email. I didn't read it aloud, didn't shove it in anyone's face. I just showed it confirmation. The thing they had forgotten to account for. The thing Vincent had deleted from the table, but not from the terms. The CEO's eyes locked on the screen. A single nod. Legal leaned in, whispering again. One of them scribbled something. Another checked the timestamp on the email. One whispered to the buyer. The buyer whispered back. A tide was turning, quietly but with crushing weight. Vincent tried one more time. She wasn't active on the team. I was leading the transition. Dana was supporting. Melissa was, monitoring. The buyer raised an eyebrow. So your company's entire liability coverage is based on someone monitoring from the sidelines. Dana flinched. Even she knew how bad that sounded. Technically, Vincent began, but he never finished. The CEO cut him off with a raised hand, then turned to legal and said, "We'll need to amend our posture immediately. Melissa's re-entry needs to be formalized. If not, this deal's gone." He didn't wait for debate, and for the first time in years, I saw fear crawl across Vincent's carefully moisturized face. His eyes flicked from the CEO to me, and in that moment, something inside him broke, not dramatically, not with shouting, just a quiet crumble, the look of a man realizing he was no longer the center of gravity. I didn't gloat. I just sat there, calm and unreadable, the binder on the table, the policy in my pocket, and the entire weight of the deal balanced squarely on my presence. Turns out, when you build the foundation, you don't need the spotlight. You just wait for the house to fall without you. Vincent stood like a man still convinced the stage lights would save him. He straightened his blazer, licked his lips, and launched into what he clearly thought was a comeback monologue. You know the type, hand gestures just big enough to register as dynamic, voice dipped in false humility, eyes scanning the room for allies who were no longer there. "Look," he said, "I think there's just been a little misalignment here. Happens in fast-paced transitions. But the bigger picture, value we bring to Kepleris is unchanged. The team is agile, the roadmap is solid, and Melissa's contributions, of course, are appreciated. We just needed a fresh voice on the mic, that's all." The words hung in the air like flat soda. The lead buyer didn't even blink. He let Vincent talk himself out like a leaking balloon. Then, when Vincent finally paused for breath, expecting, perhaps, a nod of agreement or at least a polite fake smile, buyer cut in with surgical precision. "You're not on the insurance." 6 words, one guillotine. The room went still, not quiet still. Even the legal team stopped shuffling paper. The buyer looked at Vincent like he was watching a man sell fire extinguishers to a lake. "You're not bonded, you're not credentialed, you're not leading anything." Vincent opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His hands hovered midair, gesturing at nothing. Puppet who suddenly realized his strings were attached to a closed door. Melissa, not Mel, not the legacy lead, not back-end support. Melissa was the only name on the paperwork that mattered. From my seat, I watched it happen, the unraveling. His posture sagged by degrees. His voice, when it finally returned, had lost its varnish. "I mean, we can amend that, right? Update the policy. Dana can get credentialed. We can expedite things." The buyer actually laughed, not loudly, not kindly. "You want us to pause a $160 million acquisition," he said, "so your team can cram for compliance certifications. That's not diligence, that's daycare." Dana sank 2 inches into her chair. The CEO didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence from that end of the table was permission enough for the buyer to keep swinging and for me to finally step into view, so I stood. I didn't rush. Didn't clear my throat for dramatic effect. Just placed one hand on the binder, closed it gently, and walked to the front of the room. The The buyer turned his chair toward me. "Are you willing," he asked plainly, "to resume authority over the transition process?" I met his eyes. Yes, no pitch, no flourish, just the truth. He nodded, then glanced at the CEO. "We'll need formal reinstatement in writing before COB. Otherwise, our legal team will begin pause procedures on the acquisition timeline." CEO looked like he'd swallowed a stapler. He just nodded, once. Behind me, I could feel Vincent shrinking, not physically, but reputationally. His brand, his confidence, his whole polished persona, it was deflating. You could practically hear the hiss of escaping relevance. He looked at me like I'd stolen something from him, like hunger burning in his chest. But it wasn't food he wanted, it was status. Power. The illusion that he mattered more than the process. The process didn't care who smiled wider. The process only answered to the one who built it. And I had built it. Every clause, every trigger, every god-forsaken footnote. He couldn't charm his way back into this deal, couldn't improvise his way around a policy binder that didn't know his name. And as I took the seat at the head of the table, the one he'd claimed like a throne just an hour before, I didn't gloat. I just opened the binder and said, "Page 17. That's where we start over." He sat back down. For the first time since I met him, Vincent looked small. The second the new folder slid across the table toward me, I knew. Before I even opened it, before the crisp weight of new contract pages settled beneath my fingers, I knew they'd typed my name in bold. Not by accident, not by default, but as a message. Not Melissa Granger, support. Not Mel, background ops. Melissa Ann Granger, transition lead authorized and bonded. Dead center. First page. Black ink, full weight. The Kepleris legal rep, lean, efficient, no nonsense, stood behind me, pen already in hand. "To resume diligence," she said, not unkindly, "we'll need your signature. Today, preferably now." My hand hovered over the pen. I took a breath, not to stall, not to second guess, just to mark the moment. The room was watching, and for the first time all morning, they weren't looking through me, looking to me. Vincent cleared his throat. Here it came. "Shouldn't we," he began, trying to lean forward, trying to insert himself back into a decision already made. But the CEO, pale, sweating, silent until now, just waved a hand in his direction like he was shooing off bad reception. "Vincent, stop." 2 words, full stop. It wasn't said with anger. It was said with exhaustion. The kind of voice men use when they realize they've been defending a hollow suit. Vincent sat back, mouth slightly open. No more words. I took the pen. I didn't give a speech. I didn't deliver a monologue about loyalty or foresight or the cost of being dismissed. I didn't remind anyone of the nights I'd worked late or the insurance I'd paid for out of my own account. I didn't need to. The evidence was inked already, in the paused binder, in the frozen buyer's agenda, in the way the room held its breath waiting for me to move. I flipped to the signature page. The font was cleaner this time. No smudges, no revisions pending. Just clean lines, a bold header, and one blank space. I signed. The pen glided without resistance. My name looped cleanly, every letter sealing the shape of a deal too big to move without me. The buyer nodded once. The legal rep collected the folder and tapped it twice. Done. "We'll resume diligence effective immediately," the buyer said. "Melissa, our team will sync with you directly for timelines. No intermediaries." "Understood," I replied, already reaching for the timeline spreadsheet in my satchel. Vincent made a sound, something between a sigh and a swallowed objection, but no one looked at him. Not even Dana. She'd suddenly found great fascination in her cuticles. The board chair stood. "Thank you for your clarity," he said to me. Not to Vincent. Not to the room, to me. That's the thing no one tells you about quiet competence. It doesn't explode. It doesn't dazzle. It accumulates layer by layer, hour by hour, unread email by unread email, until one day it's the only thing holding the goddamn roof up. And when everyone finally sees it, they stop asking if you can lead. They start asking when you'll take over. I gathered my materials, clean copies, annotated briefs, timeline projections, and returned to my seat at the head of the table. Not second row, not off to the side, the seat. The buyer began outlining next steps, legal synced notes. The CEO stayed quiet, nodding mechanically, eyes glassy from a full collapse in under an hour. And Vincent just sat there staring at the signature. Like maybe if he watched it long enough it would change back or change him. But it didn't, it stayed signed. My name in bold, unapologetic, no sparkle, just authority. The deal wrapped with a whimper. Not a bang. The board filed out first, murmuring gratitude, avoiding eye contact like kids who'd pulled a fire alarm and realized the sprinklers were real. One of them patted my shoulder on the way out. saying something about long overdue recognition. I didn't answer. I was busy reviewing the retention offer just handed to me by legal. 2-year contract, full transition authority, 25% bonus. Non-compete waived. Typed it all out like they'd come up with the idea themselves. Like it hadn't taken a collapsed deal, a frozen buyer, and a binder-shaped truth bomb to jog their collective memory of who kept this whole circus from becoming a liability. I initialed page after page, while the Kepleris team reassembled their timeline. The buyer looked genuinely relieved. "We'll actually sleep now," he muttered as he shook my hand, firm and brief, like men do when they're hoping they'll never have to clean up this kind of mess again. The CEO stayed seated, rubbing his temples, face drained of whatever pep talk he'd preloaded for a photo op that never came. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. Probably was already mentally workshopping the internal email to frame this as a strategic pivot. Vincent lingered. He hadn't left the room when the others did, stayed frozen in his chair like a man caught in an avalanche of his own self-belief. His laptop sat closed, his folio untouched. Even Dana had slinked out without a word, disappearing into the back-office ether where failed sidekicks retreat when the spotlight dies. I didn't offer him anything. Not a glance, not a nod. Just signed the last page of the retention agreement and slid it back to legal. That's when he finally spoke. "You really played this," he said, voice hoarse, not accusatory, more like disbelief coated in regret. Like the hunger he'd been feeding with titles and slideshows and fake authority had suddenly turned inward and started gnawing at him from the inside. I looked at him, finally. Tired blazer, eyes glassy, jaw clenched like he was still trying to smile but couldn't remember the mechanics. "I just read the fine print," I said, shrugged. Simple, true. He didn't respond, just looked at the table like it might tell him where it all went wrong. And I gathered the binder, the one he'd rewritten without understanding, the one the buyer had closed like a guillotine, the one that still bore my structure, my sequence, my initials in the margins of every section that actually mattered. I tucked it under my arm, stood up, and left the room. No farewell, no speech, just the soft click of the door behind me and the feeling of gravity finally returning to the right axis. Outside, the hallway felt lighter. Sunlight cut through the windows in stripes, like I was walking through some old cathedral of bureaucratic reckoning. I passed interns who suddenly smiled too wide, past Dana pacing in a hallway, phone to her ear, eyes panicked, past 3 board members whispering in low tones about optics and salvageable narratives. And I kept walking, binder in hand, not to gloat, not to broadcast victory, but because sometimes the biggest wins are the ones that leave no blood. Just silence and one man starving behind a closed door, finally realizing the empire he tried to build wasn't his. It was mine, and I don't need to rebuild it. I own it now. Thanks for joining the fun, you office survivors. Subscribe for more switch-flicking drama. Let's make your former coworkers sweat.